Good evening. Thank you for having me. Very careful to answer your question, and no one knows what's going to happen in the next few days and weeks. You can see the pressure increasing on the power, on the regime in Venezuela, not Nicolas Maduro, and the opposition having been very well organized this time around and having planned for that scenario. They knew that the election would be taking place, and they knew that Nicolas Maduro wouldn't step down without a fight. And this is what we are now witnessing. Most countries rejected the official election results. And what I suspect is happening now, we've got 6 months before Maduro starts his next term, and that opens the door for lengthy negotiations in order for a democratic process to hopefully start happening in Venezuela under pressure from the international community, from the US, obviously, but more interestingly, pressure from Brazil and Colombia. President Lula and President Petro in Colombia, both left-wingers, they both maintained close contact with Nicolas Maduro. And we know that there will be a meeting this afternoon between President Biden of the USA and President Lula of Brazil to probably start those negotiations. The opposition, as I said earlier, had been very organized, very well organized and very effective. And what the opposition is trying to do now is gather all the evidence to justify, to evidence the victory of their camp and push Nicolas Maduro to produce the evidence that he's won those elections. We know that evidence doesn't exist. Yeah. And that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, so that is very interesting. So, you know, Maduro has come under pressure before. There are sanctions on him, on Venezuela. Why would he sit down potentially and navigate his own exit now?
That is a big problem at the moment. There is a $15 million bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro by the United States for charges in relation to drug trafficking. And that provides a pretty strong disincentive for Maduro and his members of his regime to step down. And I think those negotiations will start discussing potential for incentives for him to step down from power, maybe through impunity for some of the charges for himself and members of his government. I think a dictator only steps down if they know what their fate will be. And in the case of Maduro, against mounting pressure from the streets, from the international community, that he's got no legitimacy as of today. And the world knows it because the opposition has been very good in gathering that evidence as much as they could. I think now is the time for Maduro to realize that there's a finite period of time for which he was going to be able to cling to power. Yeah. And I think those negotiations will start discussing those issues now, especially if Lula and Petro are leading those negotiations or talking to Maduro behind the scenes.
Yeah, because to your point, I mean, Venezuela's sort of growing vulnerability is really pressuring the countries around it.
Absolutely. And the Americans know that the US sanctions imposed in particular by Donald Trump in 2018 have caused economic chaos in Venezuela. 7.8 million Venezuelans fled the country. Nearly 3 million of them are in Colombia. That's why Petro has a stake in what happens in Venezuela. The United States, Biden, in an environment where you've got the war in Ukraine, why should the US not have access to a readily flow of oil coming from Venezuela? So I think the planets are coming together for some kind of a consensus, a compromise moving forward. And that's why, although there will be a great deal of uncertainty between now and the next few weeks and possibly months, I think the planets are aligning for some kind of a transition to democratic rule in Venezuela. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, that is encouraging if you think that that's the way it could go. Having said that, there is a lot to fix and a lot of issues that the Venezuelans are very impatient for.
Absolutely. Economic GDP has crashed by 75% under Maduro, which has led to that mass migration. and turning the economy around will be the work of a decade. But at least if Venezuelans have hope that their country can get better, then at least we will avoid a new wave of migration away from Venezuela from happening. And I think that is what's at stake at the moment. The US sanctions haven't served any purpose, really. Isolationism hasn't served any purpose. Maduro is still in power. The West is losing patience. I think they need to find another solution now to move towards a democratic transition.
Yeah, really fascinating to talk to you, and we will watch with interest as these weeks play out. Thanks, Nicolas.
Thank you very much.